So when these refineries close, the two that are scheduled to close by 2026, how many people lose their jobs?
It's dramatic. I mean, in total, I think provide about 150,000, close to 150,000 jobs directly in our industry.
The WSPA's president and CEO,
and arguably one of the most powerful lobbyists in California, Kathy Reheis-Boyd.
Why are Democrats continually voting for higher prices? Do you think that California consumers would be shocked to know that we have to import oil from places like Iraq? Why aren't we accessing the crude that we have in California?
Because the state of California won't let us access it.
Catherine Reheis-Boyd, welcome to State of Gold.
Thank you. Very nice to see you, John.
It's great to see you. You have a very nice smile on your face despite all of the issues going on in California. So I'm glad you've had your coffee, maybe like I have, and you're ready, ready to go here.
I try to stay optimistic.
You and me both. Let's start with the obvious question, I think on most consumers' minds at least. Why is gas so damn expensive in California?
Thanks, John. It's a great question. And it's one we get asked a lot. And there's lots of factors. The biggest being supply. It's all about supply and demand. You've got to have enough supply to meet demand. And in California, just to start with, we're an energy island. So we do not have the benefit of having any pipelines that bring supply to the state. So you are very dependent on the infrastructure and the refiners we have here and the crude oil that we produce here. Otherwise, it's all coming in from foreign imports 40 days away. First of all, we have this geographical constraint. Second of all, we also have some very aggressive policies in California that have added up over a multitude of years. And I'm not saying some of those costs aren't meritorious, but as you, I think, know, about $1.30 of every gallon of gasoline goes towards federal state taxes, goes towards cap and trade, low carbon fuel standard, climate change proposals, gas taxes. So before any of our companies actually make something valuable out of crude oil into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, $1.30 of that is straight off the top. So that's a big number. That also does not include the other cost of doing business in California. And for refiners, it's 2 to 3 times more costly to do business in California, regardless of even the $1.30 I just referenced. So labor, electricity, natural gas, all the local air district fees, local fees. So there's many things even on top of that that make it difficult for our refiners and producers to compete in a global market.
Right.
So there's many factors that go into it, and it's easy to make an assertion that those increases are just a result of our members, but clearly from the own data from the state, it is clearly not the case.
We talk about that buck 30. So you mentioned it's both state and federal. What portion of that $1.30 in tax is federal?
Take the federal out because that's a fair question, just for apples and apples, right? If you took that out, you're still about a dollar, $1.05, $1.10, depending. So it's still a large part. And so that's what we always talk about is not that we're saying they aren't meritorious, but we're saying be transparent and honest about it. If we're really going to talk about gas prices, we should all be open and transparent about what goes into them because
Hmm.
those are all choices that every state makes. They
Right.
make policy choices, and those policy choices at cost, and then, we find ourselves where we are.
I think you're being kind, Catherine, when you're calling them meritorious. Meritorious is a nice word, and they may be, but that $1.05 to $1.10 that's going into the state of California's coffers, what are they doing with that money?
That is always the big question, right, John? Where does the money go and what is it used for? Right now, because cap and trade is in debate in the legislature, what's gonna happen to it? Is it gonna be extended? Is it gonna be more difficult? Because of those conversations, many people are asking, well, where does the current cap and trade money go? Because it's a large amount. The auction money is certainly on decline, but it is a large amount of money. People want to know where it goes. Nobody has a good answer for that. So I think what you begin hearing is that the question that you are asking, which is the right one, is shouldn't we know where the money's going before we do something that increases the cost?
That doesn't seem to be the California governmental way.
It should be, but it doesn't seem to be.
It should be. I mean, all the money that we're taxing and spending in this state. In recent news, Democrats in the state Senate, right, have recently voted against Senate Bill 2, which would have halted changes to the LCFS. For those who aren't familiar, the low carbon fuel standard in California. Why are Democrats continually voting for higher prices? What is the mentality or what is the angle?
I think a lot of it is really educating them on our industry, in fact. And and I think what's turned around now, and I think a little of the pivot even from the governor, is his recent letter to Commissioner Gunda of the Energy Commission. You know, definitely a
Help.
pivot in his tone, definitely a pivot in his question.
Yeah.
We cannot have any more refiners leave the state. Go figure it out, Commissioner Gunda, and get back to me by July 1st. Very different question than we've heard coming out of the governor. The right question, but it's been a long time in coming. So it is a very pivotal moment in time for California because we are now asking the right question. I wish we didn't have to manage in crisis because we're in one. I wish we would have planned better because technical realities, John, always get in the way of aspirational goals, and hope is not a plan. And
Hope is not a
and
plan.
hope is not a plan.
That's right.
So now that these questions are being asked, we have an opportunity to make some changes to get California back on track because we are nowhere on track.
You know, I'm sure you recall this infamous recent hearing in front of the State Utility Energy Commission. You had the head of CARB, the Air Resources Board. You had the head of the Energy Commission, Gunda, and you had the head of the Petroleum Market Oversight Committee. And by the way, when I read all these names, they almost feel Soviet. You had all of these leaders testifying, and you had these Democratic Assembly members seemingly shocked and stunned, stumbling over their questions of these experts about how is it that our policies have led to a place we're going to have to net import oil. Do you think that California consumers would be shocked to know that we have to import oil from places like Iraq, Ecuador, and Saudi?
I think they would be very shocked. And I think what we're finding is this conversation is sort of yielding more exposure to not only the normal folks of California, but also to the legislature who should know. I think what's happening is it's elevated the concern that these legislators have relative to the infrastructure of this state and where we are. And so I think their concern is now rightfully placed. We have been talking about it for 4 years. The fact that we're actually having the right conversation is encouraging. I'm frustrated by the fact that it's during a crisis that we have to have it. And finally, policy is beginning to surface over politics, which is why it's been always been difficult because if it's politics over policy, you are never going to get to any answer that's going to move California forward. So now people are like, oh my goodness, in the early 90s, we had 20 refineries. We have nine, soon to have eight, soon to have seven. And some of the data that's coming forward, even from the own Energy Commission consultants, is by 2040, we may have one refiner. The problem, John, is we still got 40 million people that drive 36 million cars and trucks every day. So demand is not decreasing, supply is not increasing. Electricity, which is the chosen path, we believe in an all of the above energy strategy. Electricity is piece, but not all. That is not advancing anywhere at the pace that they had expected. So we have an absolute misstep of these curves of supply, demand, traditional oil and gas, jet fuel, diesel, and alternatives and renewables. They're not matched up at all.
Right, right.
And so now here we are.
Here we are. Here we are. I was talking to a policy expert recently who educated me that in the next generation, the next 20 years, power to supply California, to phase out, carbon fuels would need to increase in terms of wind and solar by 75 times to actually meet the demand in California. Of course, that's completely unrealistic. And we do need a mix. We need a mix in California. We need a mix in the country, and of course, in the world. One follow up on this issue of importing tons of oil from other parts of the world that needs to be floated or trucked right into California. And tons of emissions happen when you float or you truck oil into California. Is that taken into account by California government that we're polluting the rest of the world? And then, of course, it just slides into our ports or on trucks.
Yeah, and really good point, John. And the volumes are so large, we're really not even talking trucks. We're really talking marine vessels.
We're talking
Oh,
tankers.
yeah, we're talking tankers. And I think what's becoming apparent for legislators is they're beginning to understand, wait a minute, California is supposed to be a leader in climate change, and our plan is to import crude oil from 40 days away, put it on our tanker, increase greenhouse gas emissions, and oh, I'm supposed to be concerned about market volatility and price at the pump. Oh, wait a minute, that's going to cost more. So, more greenhouse gas emissions, more cost to the consumer. This cannot be our plan. This is why I say we do not have a plan. That cannot be it.
Right.
And then they're now beginning to wake up to what's happening in the ports. Much more congested ports, not able to take more vessel traffic when our strategy seems to be moving in that direction and we're nowhere prepared there either. So if you're constrained to import it in, you're constrained with existing refiners who are literally leaving the state. And just to note, John, we should talk about the crude oil production side.
We should. I want to come to that, but I want to make one point, and then I want to talk about California actually being self-sufficient. I know we have a ton of crude underneath us in this state that we could access. But the irony of the current climate policy in California across all industries that I observe is that California, in the example of, say, ag, let's grow stuff here, but let's not actually produce it here. Let's send it to Nevada, let them have the factories and the jobs, do the emissions, and then send the product back to us on a truck. So we're fine with emissions happening somewhere else, but not in California, but we're exporting jobs. And I think the same thing's about to happen in the oil business, which is insane. So let's talk about this point you just made, which is we've got a ton of crude. I gather a lot of it's heavy. Why aren't we accessing the crude that we have in California?
Thank you, John. And as I have told the media in the past, we have the biggest petroleum reserve of crude oil probably in the world, which is in Kern County.
Hold
It's
on.
in the reserves under the ground.
I want to hear this again. You said the biggest reserves in the world.
Well, certainly in the United States. We used to be like, number 3 as a county, and now we're down to 7th and 8th. Not because the crude oil isn't sitting there, because the state of California won't let us access it.
They won't issue additional
Yeah.
licenses to
So
drill.
new drills, new well drill permits, basically.
Right.
And the reason for that is clearly politics over policy. So you have to make sure that you have complied with CEQA. We have. The California Environmental Quality Act. We have. You have to make sure you've done all mitigation for any kind of impacts. We have. And so what's very frustrating is the members have done all of that, and yet the state refuses to give permits. This is a policy that has to reverse, not only because of the jobs you just referenced coming from the oil and gas production side and the fact that we don't have to pay more money to transport it here, but clearly the refiners in California, especially many of them, are geared to utilize Kern County crude, heavy or not. Their refineries were designed about it. Why wouldn't they be? It was in their backyard. So their preference is to have San Joaquin Valley crude. And you've got pipelines from Kern County going to these refiners to get this crude oil to them. One of the things people are beginning to understand is those pipelines have got to have a minimum of 30% crude oil in them to flow. If they don't, they shut down. We are getting close to the point where they will shut down. Now you may have crude oil, but you have no way to get it to the refiners. So this is a critical point that the governor has to address and that we hope the Energy Commission addresses with him in their response due July 1st. That is not a tomorrow issue. That is not a 2-year issue. That's not a fact. That is a today issue.
Right.
So that has got to be fixed urgently.
Let's talk about environmental regs just for a second, not to get into the arcane here. CEQA obviously is a law that is being looked at right currently by California state government. It needs major reform. It's been perverted into a cabal of regulators, trial lawyers, and special interests, right, that are perverting the original intent of environmentalism in California in the 70s, which was a good intent, which is to keep California beautiful. We all want that. We all live here or spend a lot of time here, and it's been perverted so that anyone can hijack anything just because they don't like it, right? To the detriment of regular citizens. So clearly that needs to be changed. But if you just look at the environmental laws that are on the books right now in California, they're as numerous and as stringent as anywhere in the country. And can the oil and gas business conform to those regs, to the letter of the law, and dramatically increase production at the same time? What are the tensions, if any, between those two things?
Really good question. And obviously, every company is a little different in their forecast for, as they plan going in the future, but obviously cost is critical, right? And so if you get to a point where the cost exceeds your ability to not only operate, but to actually survive and enhance your company, you have no other choice but to make a different decision that's not in the best interest of California and the one we don't want to make, which is to leave. So it is a very tension right now because we are at a tipping point with cost and our ability to continue to produce reliable, affordable, ever cleaner fuels to California. So it's a very tenuous position. And one in particular market signal that the governor could send is to get rid of those things that are telling investors, and we're not talking oil company investors, we're talking, capital investors, to make a decision to invest in California. Because when Valero announced they were closing their Northern California refinery, the next day their stock went up. And that is a public fact. And so when you get these questions, that's the answer, right? It's like their stock went up because their investors are really happy they're not going to
Right.
stay here. So I think that's the telling point for me. It's like, okay, we are at that tipping point where California needs to send a different signal than the one they have sent, John, which is we really don't want you here.
Right, right. I want to take a quick time out to encourage all of our listeners and viewers to subscribe to this channel and follow us so you don't miss another great conversation with someone like Catherine. Can we talk about the anatomy of that gallon of gas for a minute? I'm a numbers guy and always curious about this. So if I'm paying an average of 550 right now where I live in California for 91 into my car with a big engine, which I like to drive and plan to continue to drive. I did own electric. I ended up throwing the keys back to the dealer because the range wasn't good. And of course, that's changing dramatically in a good way. But I believe in freedom of choice. So 550 a gallon. After you take out the buck 30 that's going to federal and state. So let's say you've got about $4.20 left. What is the anatomy, Catherine, of that $4.20? What is the gross profit for the oil business or pre-tax profit after all the costs in California to actually refine, produce, and deliver that through a a big truck to the filling station so I can get it?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And the one thing I will say, because we talked a little earlier, that does not include any of the higher cost of doing business here, which is labor, definitely. Uh, Definitely the cost of electricity and natural gas. So a lot of people call this the mystery surcharge. There's no mystery in the difference. It's all the other costs that aren't even in the $1.30 that you referenced.
Hmm.
In the air districts themselves, the fees in air districts are up 15%, which is causing huge financial impact to these companies. When you have rules coming up that the next investment a refiner has to make, like in Southern California, is $300 million on a piece of equipment, it's gonna have they're say like, "No, I'm not I can't do it."
Right.
So, that's the difference. That's the difference is and, certainly everybody has their, cost of being able to take a barrel of crude oil and turn it into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, right? There's a lot of operational costs that go into that everybody pays across the United States. But the difference is really this other cost structure of everything else laid up top of the $1.30 we even talked about that is really a lot more some state, but a lot more local air district, local cities and counties that get placed on top of that.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. I want to talk about solutions and kind of what the path is forward, right? Because we're in a place where we're a little over a year out of some major statewide elections in California. 2026, we're going to turn over leadership potentially in a positive direction, but we'll get to that in a minute. Um, we're at a time when a lot of people are hurting in California. You have the governor talking about California being the fourth largest economy. I think I'm going to shoot myself if I hear that again, because for people like us, the economy's working. Highly paid, been successful, been lucky in life. And for the average working class person and working poor, they can't afford to live in California. The median priced home's $900,000, and things are just getting more and more and more expensive. So when these refineries close, Catherine, the two that are scheduled to close by 2026, how many people lose their jobs?
It's dramatic. I mean, in total, we I think provide about 150,000, close to 150,000 jobs, directly in our industry, and certainly when we're looking at even, auxiliary jobs, it's up in the $500,000. And every one of those jobs is delivering on average, our salary is $118,000. That's 167 times what construction salary is, right? So the amount of wages that are generated from these jobs, literally in the billions of dollars that go back into the economy. So there was a study recently done on Marathon when they converted their refinery from a normal refinery to renewable diesel. Certainly renewable diesel, no fossil,
Hmm.
obviously good for the environment. But there was a lot of people who lost their jobs. And the recent study said at least 26% of them have not been employed yet. And that's been 3 years. So not only are they not making the salary they were, they're making no salary.
Right.
So the impact of these closures on the workforce that does what we do, right, every single day is huge. Absolutely huge. That's why you hear workforce development as such a big issue. But in workforce development as an issue, it's also don't tell me I'm being developed at a third of the salary I'm making and say that's okay.
Right.
That's not a just transition.
That sounds like workforce regression. So
Yes.
150,000 people directly employed in oil and gas in California, big number. Those who support or related to it, upwards of 500,000 people. We've got 40 million people in California. I'm not sure what percent are adults, call it 25 million. If you've got a half million people, that's 1 in 50 adults, approximately, who are employed directly in oil and gas or support or related. That's a huge, huge impact. Let's hope that we can keep these jobs at the high salaries.
Even from an ethnicity standpoint, 50% of who we employ are the Latino community, and a third of who we employ are women. So, I mean
50% of the direct employees of oil and gas are Latinos.
right. So, when you talk about the impact of the demographics to the state is huge. It's absolutely
That is
huge.
huge. That is huge. Let's shine a ray of hope. We both started with smiles on our faces. We've gotten a little more serious as the conversations progress. But from a policy perspective, let's say that you've got a collaborative leadership in Sacramento in January of 2027, right? There's been an election, there's been a seat change, you've got someone rational running the state. You're sitting down with the new governor and the team. What are the couple policies you're advocating for to put in day one?
Yeah, thank you, John. And just to note, you said collaboration, because since I have been doing this 40 years, at least for maybe 25 of them, we were in the collaborative space. Like we did 3 cleaner burning gasolines. We took the lead out of gasoline. We put the sulfur out of diesel. We've made huge reductions and we've done great collaborative partnerships together with the state and the environmental community. And then something happened, which I'm actually trying to explore what and why and when. Because then we moved into a non-collaborative space, which has really been detrimental, and we find ourselves where we are today. My optimism, as I said in the beginning, is that we now have a group of people that have been assigned to sit down and try to collaboratively figure out how the governor can or how Sivagunda can answer the governor. And that includes, we're glad that we're at the table. I am certainly there. But we also have the building trades, we have USW, we have the environmental community, we have the EJ community, and we have all the agencies who you just mentioned are in charge of all of this. So that is the collaboration. So one of the things for 27 go forward is we got to keep that. We got to keep that going. That is the only way we're going to get anywhere in California. And I'm a big fan of balancing the economy and the environment. And I've always said when the pendulum goes either way, it's not good policy. We need to be right here to do
Hmm.
good policy. And right now we're way over here.
Right.
Thank God affordability is now bringing it back to a logical, pragmatic conversation. So that collaboration is one. Specifically, we cannot make the situation worse. Half of the things being talked about right now across the street add cost. They don't take away cost, they add cost. How are we going to deal with cap and trade? Easiest thing, just do an extension. But for whatever, do not start putting bells and whistles on that program that's going to shoot the cost up, that then make these refiners and producers say, wrong direction. They're not opposed to doing it. They're not opposed to low carbon fuel standard, but can you make it better for businesses to use it? So that's one. CEQA reform, what I would say there, the Energy Commission has to have a bigger role in decisions made at the local level. Because what happens is a lot of those decisions are very focused on the environment, which is fine, but they don't have anyone saying, if we make this decision, what does it do to supply and what does it do to the cost to consumers? There is no cost benefit analysis of anything anymore. We just do it all. So that would be definitely get cost benefit, technology, feasibility back on the table, and please balance the two, the environment and the economy, so we can have a policy that actually has a chance to go forward. So CEQA reform, Energy Commission's rule, they're the only ones who know about that part of the business, energy, infrastructure, supply, demand, cost. Bring them forefront of the conversation so those decisions can be weighed.
It sounds too rational, Catherine.
I know. I'm
It
not even
sounds
saying
too
it's
rational.
cool. But, and then I would say things like, I mean, the other example is carbs at birth reg. That was a reg that was passed that limits our vessels coming into the Port of LA and Long Beach. I'm like, I don't understand. How can you limit vessels coming into Port of LA and Long Beach when your policy is to increase them?
Right.
I don't understand. So
Right.
it's those kind of, I think, John, keep asking the questions. Be curious about everything. Like, oh, that's an interesting policy, CARB. How does that work when we need more vessels and you're restricting them? So it's that's just one example of many, but it's the get curious enough to ask the question so we do not increase the cost and do more harm. So we end up accelerating refiners and producers ability to keep supplying the market in a time frame. It's pace and scale, right? You've got to have pace and scale with all this. And so it's we just have not been realistic or pragmatic in any way in this conversation until now.
Right.
So I would say in 27, for crying out loud, let's keep doing it because we got a lot of work to do to turn this around and we do not have a lot of time.
Right. Well, it turns out the free market's a thing. It turns out that when consumers feel pressed and they're pressing their elected representatives, they wake up, and it turns out that upcoming elections tend to focus the mind, right? So let's hope that things line up in the right way, November of 2026, and we can get some changes. Before we finish, I want to ask you if we don't do these things that we're talking about, common sense collaboration, mitigating regulation, mitigating any policy or canceling any policy that increases cost to consumers, so we keep oil and gas as a major presence in California, what will the cost of a gallon of gas be in 1 year or 3 years?
Yeah, USC did a big study on this recently, and they predicted $10 a gallon. So I think 8 to 10, $8 to $10 a gallon. So can you imagine? We're having this kind of conversation right now at these levels. Can you imagine the conversation that we would be having if that happens?
No, I think we'd really have riots, and I think we'd actually need the National Guard.
It won't even be cost of fuel, it'll be, can you get it? We say we can't have a Diablo Canyon moment on the transportation fuels. And what we mean by that is, they woke up and they kept Diablo because they didn't have enough electricity, right? And you can't do that. I mean, you better, because on the transportation side, there's no switch to turn. Like, you better have the infrastructure and the supply. You better have all that in place, or you're going to talk. I mean, rolling blackouts, you can kind of, okay, unplug here, do this, do that. Transportation fuels, you don't have that ability.
Right, of course. This we're talking about major infrastructure, major capital, and major lead times. Let's finish with some rapid fire, Catherine. Would we do with every guest? I'm going to ask you a few questions, gut response, one word, one phrase. You're king for a day. What do you do to make California better?
Active listening and collaboration.
Okay. What do outsiders get wrong about California?
What do they get wrong? I sure know what they get right.
By the way,
Um,
you can say that we don't actually know what we're doing from a state government perspective.
yeah, I said, yeah, what they get wrong. Most of them get, I think, the perception right, which is California is a mess.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
yeah,
From your mouth. What gives you hope about California? Deep breath.
I think they are. I do believe there are very good people in this state who want to do the right thing.
I agree with you. Is there a leader in California you admire, past or present, and why?
In I would say past, Governor Brown ended up to be a very pragmatic, balanced environment and economy, square on as a governor, and he knew how to lead in both of those spaces.
Yeah, Pat Brown's name's come up a lot, and he seems to have been one of the gold standards for the Golden State, unlike his son. California is fill in the blank.
In crisis, but still promising.
Very good. Very good. You are a communicator for a living. Catherine, thank you so much for this conversation. Very insightful. I think that you show admirable restraint and balance given the challenge of your job on a day to day basis. So I congratulate you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you, John, and I appreciate you doing this. It really means a lot. This is the type of thing that has to get out there, and I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you for taking an active role in it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.